everybody, how you doing out there? Good to see you again. Hey, coming live again, taped from my kitchen. It is time for Chapter 4, Section 1 review, and that means we are going to hit the Indus and Ganges River Valley geography. Now, here's the thing. I'm going to move through this kind of quickly, so you got to make sure you pay attention. I got to think a couple of things I got to take care of first, but before I do, what I want to cover is the initial geographic setting. As we talked about in class, the Indian subcontinent juts out into the Indian Ocean, and on page 107, if everybody turns to page 107, you will see the key terms: subcontinent, monsoon, citadel, migrate, cast. And the Indian subcontinent juts out into the Indian Ocean. And if you look on page 107, you'll see the Indian Ocean, you'll see the map there. And in the northern part of India, we have the Hindu Kush Mountains on one side, and on the other side we have the Himalaya Mountains. And of course, coming out of those mountains, you have the Indus River and the Ganges River. All right? Now, one of India's most influential climate activity issues kind of situations is the monsoons. Now, we know that there are both winter and summer monsoons, and each of those impacts or affects, I gotta fix my chair, each of those impacts or affects the people and the continent in different ways. And so I'm going to start off with the winter monsoons. Now, the winter monsoons bring a lot of, fix my hat here, and the winter monsoons bring a lot of cool, dry air, very, very cool, dry air across the Indian subcontinent, across the Indian subcontinent, and what it does is it brings about a refreshing change from the earlier portions of the, oh my gosh, it brings about an earlier change from the climate changes across the entire Indian subcontinent. The winter monsoons are the refreshing monsoons that bring about a change. They bring about cool, dry air. It helps to relieve the land of that heavy, heavy moisture. Comes out of the Himalaya Mountains and out of the Hindu Kush Mountains, travels across the land, and as you can see, it was very cool and dried me off, and somehow I ended up with cats and dogs and all kinds of stuff from these crazy monsoons because it's strong winds, and obviously there were strong winds. Now, the other side, once the winter monsoons kind of dry everything out and the Indian Ocean starts over time, what happens is they start collecting moisture, and as the Indian Ocean brings this moisture off of the water, what happens is the monsoons, they completely douse people with water that ultimately feeds and allows the crops to, oh my goodness, it allows the crops, it allows the crops to gain not only nutrients, and of course the soil becomes very fertile, and people then can farm, and they can ultimately feed themselves. They can feed their what am I thinking, Josh? Feed their what?
Food.
Feed their food. That doesn't make sense. They can feed their families until the winter comes again. And you know what happens with the winter monsoons? When the winter monsoons come in, it blows cool, dry air, and the cycle starts up again. Because what happens is people then have the opportunity to wrap up, stay warm, and have a refreshing change over time. This cycle, we have wet and come on in, Josh. I like this. This is don't be silly. This is Josh. He helped me out with a little bit of the special effects on that. All right, go do your homework. And
Homework.
Whew, man, I am wet. So The monsoons, or the strong winds, and the summer monsoons blow the moist air across the Indian Ocean and onto the continent for all kinds of different crops. The winter monsoons bring the cool, dry air from the Himalayas and the Hindu Kush Mountains, and that sustains life on the Indian subcontinent. I know it was a little redundant, a little repetitive there, but I was trying to have some fun with it, and I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you turn to page 108, you will see life in the Indus River Valley. These river valleys, of course, have fertile soil, great crops. The land does flood, and that's why Mohenjo-Daro, on page 108, the most ancient of Indian cities, Mohenjo-Daro, was built slightly above the ground level, so that when the Indus River flowed or overflowed or flooded, the people were not completely washed out, as I was a few minutes ago in my kitchen, and they built on this high mound of earth. In and around the center of the city was a place called the Citadel, and you learned about a citadel from not only English, but you're learning about it here now. And the Citadel was a big, important public place, the city's highest point, and it served for public officials, and of course it also served for a fortress in case of attack, and people could then gain supplies. You can find the Citadel, you can find the Mohenjo-Daro, you can find the ancient city of Harappa on page 108 and page 109. And as you know, Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa were very similar to our modern day cities. The differences, of course, were technology and just time, because over time more and more technology makes its way onto the scene. The people didn't have it at the time, except they did have some drainage systems and some irrigation systems, but ultimately most of the city would have existed very, very kind of cutting edge, or what we would think of cutting edge is for being back in the day. If you look on page 109, I'm not going to hammer away at this, but traders. You had artisans, you had all the typical shops. One side were public buildings, the other side of the street were merchant buildings in Mohenjo-Daro, and we also know that they had a series of gods there as well. If you look on page 110, you can see that those people migrated or moved for a purpose or moved for a reason into Central Asia. On page 110, it talks about the Aryans who came in with chariots. Now, the Aryans had chariots, and they had iron weapons and iron tools, which allowed them to clear forests, establish cities, take over people, beat them up, take their stuff, and ultimately establish their own social, military, and political order. And if you look on page 110, it talks a little bit about the Aryan culture coming in and some intermarriage. And most of what we know about the Aryan culture today comes from the religious text called the Vedas. That can be found on page 111. The Vedas, which means knowledge, talks about the earliest Aryans being herders and warriors. And the Aryans' order, or the order of things, or their organized of society, was around basically three different classes, or three different castes or groupings. First were the Brahmins, or the priests, and below them was the warriors and nobles. And then you had, well, I say three, then there were artisans and merchants, and then eventually there was a fourth class at the bottom, so technically it wasn't three, it was four. The fourth class below that was made up of farm workers, laborers, and servants. So we had Brahmins and priests, warriors and nobles, merchants and artisans, and then we have farm workers, laborers, and servants. Okay, and those were what we call classes, or back in the old school it was known as a caste, like cast on your arm, C-A-S-T-E. And if you read on page 111, it talks a little bit more in depth about those, and you should know those basic caste organizations for the test coming up. Okay? Again, make sure, as we kind of wind down this first section, there's not a whole lot there. You remember the winter and the summer monsoons. I know I was a little goofy with that. Hopefully you had fun watching. I had fun acting, or pretending to act. Now I'm soaking wet. But if you look on page 111, the comp and crit, comprehension and critical thinking questions, if you go through those and make sure, which is really important, again, that you definitely get to more than just the root definition of a word. You have to explain the entire word and the root definition, and then everything that surrounds it so that you can support it as if I don't know what it is you're talking about, okay? Imagine I'm a dummy. I'm not, but imagine I am. And then you'll be fine, all right? Okay. Moving on. We have Hinduism. On page 114, your key words, key terms. Brahman, single spiritual